Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There are 5 weeks to go until the Tarawera ultramarathon. It's absolutely scorching out there. I went for a run today on the Huia Down Road and I really enjoyed it, but it was pretty hot, so I calmed my pace down. Now on that note, we should probably make a little bit of a side before we get into the main topic is, even though it's scorching out there, I strongly suggest that while it's great to run early in the morning or late in the evening when it's a bit cooler, you probably should try and get out at least 1 or 2 days a week and run in the heat of the day. Simply because on race day, you're going to be out there for, in most cases, at least 24 hours, potentially 30 hours. So it would be a really good idea to get used to running in the heat, because you might have to run through one hot afternoon, maybe even to a second hot afternoon if you're either not quite having the race day that you wanted or you're a little bit further back in the pack, and that's okay. So make sure you go and run in all of the conditions that you're likely to in the race. Subject of today, nutrition. Now with 5 weeks to go, I kind of have a little bit of bad news, and the bad news is that you probably should already have been practicing your nutrition for quite a few weeks already in the run up to the race. There is still some good news, and the answer is here that it's not too late. The cells in the lining of your gut actually get replaced every few weeks, and there's some really good science about this. Now what this also means is that your gut tends to adapt very quickly to changes in nutrition that you take in. So if you haven't already been practicing, get out there and start practicing your nutrition now. Learn what you need to eat, and that will really help you for race day. It's a very important thing that you're going to need to do, and we're going to talk about why. So I'm just sitting here in a chair, and my heart rate is probably, I don't know, it's quite warm, so maybe in this low 60s. And so at this kind of heart rate and this kind of level of exertion, I'm burning probably mostly fat. As exercise intensity increases, you burn a greater proportion of sugar. Now I know people talk about fat burning zone and carbohydrate burning zone, and then lactate. It's not as simple as there's this one thing, then you discretely switch over. It kind of happens on a scale. So now I'm probably burning 80% fat, 20% carbs. If I were to go out on a light jog at say 40 to 60% of VO2 max, I might be burning 50-50 carbs and fat. And if I went and ran harder, say not quite marathon pace effort, but up tempo, so 70 to, let's say marathon pace effort, so 70-90% of VO2 max, I'm probably burning 80% carbs and 20% fat. And above that, we've got the lactate zone, and then right at the very top when you're sprinting, we've got alactic zones as well. Most of the time, we're going to be running much more towards the 40 to 60% end of things in an ultra marathon. So even though we're burning an appreciable proportion of fat, and your body stores, you have far more fat in your body than you can burn in a 100-mile race, so we don't need to worry about fat too much. We're still burning an appreciable fraction of carbohydrate, which means that during a race, we need to take in carbohydrate. The other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be sweating. It's probably going to be temperatures usually at Tarawera in the mid-teens to the mid, possibly even the high 20s. So you could be sweating out maybe half a litre, maybe even as much as a litre of fluid every single hour. So you're going to need to replace that. Also, your sweat includes electrolytes like Na+, so sodium, K+, potassium. The main one really is sodium. So in addition to burning carbohydrate, we're sweating fluid out and we're sweating electrolytes out. To run 100 miles, you're going to be out there a very long time. You are going to need to replace all of those things. Now this is an incredibly delicate balance here, because if we drink too little water, we'll get dehydrated, our performance will be poor. If we take in too little carbohydrate, we'll kind of run out of carbs, our blood sugar will dip, and our performance will suffer, and you'll just start to feel really just a bit grotty. Similarly, if you don't have enough salt, salt aids your stomach in the absorption of carbohydrate. It also, you need to replace the salt you're sweating out, so that won't maximize your performance either. If you have too much salt, that you're salty, it'll taste horrible. If you have too many carbs, you can potentially get gastric distress, where you're eating and it just piles up in your stomach and you're not absorbing it, and you're either going to puke it up or you're going to get diarrhea and it's going to come out the other end. Neither of which are very fun. The final one is water. If you have too much water, firstly you will start to slosh, and if your stomach is sloshing, that's a good sign that you're not absorbing the calories and the fluid in your stomach. Keep on going and the sloshing will become gastric distress, so you'll puke or get diarrhea again. And if you keep drinking beyond that, you can end up with a thing called exercise-associated hyponatremia, which can be a headache, nausea, dizziness, and in extreme cases can kill you. Now, just a point here, no one has ever died in a race from having drunk too little water, from dehydration. There are quite a few cases in the literature from people who have drunk too much and died from hyponatremia. Now, what happens is you end up with less than 135 millimoles per litre of salt in your blood, and that means that the inside of your cells is saltier than all of the fluids in your blood and surrounding them. And what tends to happen is water follows salt. So water will go into your cells, makes the cells swell, and if that happens to be in your brain swells, your brain can't go anywhere. So the only thing it can do is herniate through the foramen magnum, which is the hole at the bottom of your skull. Now, your brainstem controls your breathing and everything else, so what happens is you basically stop breathing, you have a fit, and you die. Cheery thought, huh? So, hyponatremia is dangerous. I don't think we've ever seen any serious cases of Tarawera, but just be aware that drinking too much fluid is actually more dangerous than not drinking enough. So there are some guidelines around this. You probably want to be drinking somewhere between, I don't know, maybe 600 ml of fluid an hour, and we'll talk about how to know how much to drink in a second. You want to have a little bit of salt, maybe half a gram of salt in some form going in, and you probably need to have 50 to maximum 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. Now, there are people who can ingest as much as 120 or even more grams of carbohydrate per hour, but that is a huge amount. So 100 grams of carbs per hour is 4 gels. 125 grams per hour is 5 gels. I couldn't manage that. I can manage probably 3 gels per hour, so 300 calories. And when I was running a marathon recently, I ingested 320 calories per hour on top of breakfast, and that seemed to work very, very fine for me for 3 hours. So some guidelines. Train now with the nutrition you're going to use in the race. You need to work out what is going to work for you. To have a good breakfast and some fluid before the race. So I tend to have a large bowl of porridge with LSA powder in it and maybe a bit of peanut butter, and I will have at least one large coffee because I'm a caffeine addict. During the race, start eating near the start of the race, and you want to have something to eat, be that a gel, be that whatever, and we'll talk about some things that I quite like in a minute. So you want to have something to eat every maybe 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes max. Now, after a while, that won't feel very, very fun, but if you stop eating, you'll start to feel a bit grotty and your blood sugar will get low and everything will slow down a little bit. So just try and force yourself to keep eating. On the other hand, like I said earlier, if you're sloshing in your stomach, it's probably because you've got too much food or too much fluid. So maybe just slow down the pace just a little bit and slow down the intake just a little bit as well. Palate fatigue is real. So to avoid palate fatigue, have a mixture of sweet and salty foods, because if you're constantly taking gels all the time, 24 hours of gels I think would be just awful. So I use a mixture of things. Pretzels are quite good. The other thing, as I said earlier, you need to intake some salt. Now, we should probably just have a brief word about salt. Lots of people take things like salt caps and things like that, thinking it will prevent hyponatremia. It doesn't. There was a study done in Western states by Marty Hoffman, who was the medical director, and increasing intake of salt caps, so sodium, table salt, there was no preventative mechanism found or no result found. So people who ate tons and tons of salt were just as likely to have a hyponatremia as people who had very little salt indeed. Sounds a bit counterintuitive, but those are the facts. In a similar vein, people think salt prevents cramping. Probably doesn't. There have been studies done. The same study by Marty Hoffman at Western States, medical director, also noted that increasing amounts of salt intake were not correlated with reduced amounts of cramp. So people who had lots and lots of salt cramped just as much as those who didn't. Cramp is much more probably a neuromuscular fatigue symptom. So if you've got cramp, slow down a little bit. Take a bit of salt, won't do you any harm, but don't expect the salt necessarily to prevent it. Interestingly enough, a sharp tasting substance like lemon juice, pickle juice, vinegar can reduce cramp, at least temporarily. So you'll see these little sachets of Cramp Stop. There is actually some science to that. It does seem to work. No one's really quite sure what the mechanism is, but it's probably not because of the salt, it's because of the sharp taste, hence neuromuscular. So mixture of stuff, including salty stuff and sweet stuff. And finally, drink to thirst. I talked about earlier that you're probably going to want maybe 600 ml of fluid per hour, less on a colder day, or if you're not much of a sweater, more if you can tolerate it. Your body will tend to tell you when you're thirsty. You'll get a sensation of thirst, you'll get dry mouth, you won't be peeing a lot. If you are peeing, it'll be very dark. None of these are cast iron symptoms or signs, by the way, so you probably need to be careful. But drinking to thirst is a good mechanism to make sure that you are not drinking too much. So just make sure that you do drink when you're thirsty, and just kind of listen to your body and pay attention. Some of those things might be quite controversial, particularly the ones around hydration. I suggest you go read a very, very good book by Professor Tim Noakes called Waterlogged, in which he talks about the science of hydration. While he can be a bit of a controversial figure because he went slightly off the rails during the COVID era, he is still a superb running physiologist and knows an awful lot about hydration and nutrition, so he's probably kind of worth listening to. The other one is salt and cramp. Cramp is multifactorial. There's lots of things that can potentially give you cramp or can potentially help you with cramp. Salt is not necessarily to do with electrolyte imbalance, but it probably doesn't help, to be honest. So taking a bit of extra salt certainly isn't going to do you any harm, provided you don't keep throwing back too many of those salt taps. So things that work for me. I like to have a mix of what you might call engineered foods like gels and real food. So on the gel side, I quite like the Morton gels, although you might have to sell a bodily organ to be able to afford them, but they are very good. So that's 100 calories, so 2 or 3 of those per hour. I won't rely just on those. Also caffeinated gels. Caffeine is actually one of the few supplements that has very good evidence to back it for running performance. It is a stimulant. It also aids in fat metabolism, increases the proportion of fat you burn. So quite useful. So I use gels. I probably no more than 1, max 2 of those an hour because I find them a bit much if I have too many of those in an ultra. Morton also make a drinks mix. They make it 160 calorie and 320 calorie versions. The 320 calorie is quite thick and syrupy, but it works very well. I used this during my recent sub-3 marathon, so that worked for me. Again, I probably wouldn't rely on just Morton 320 mix as my sole source of nutrition or indeed hydration during the race. I'd probably use this and some plain water as well. I talked about real food. I'm a sucker for jelly sweets. They work really well for me. I can get them down. I can seem to be able to choke them down even if I'm not very happy. So I quite like those. Tons of carbs in them. Moving more towards the real food end of the scale. Squashed fly biscuits, also known as Garibaldi biscuits, fly cemeteries, golden fruit biscuits. They're really, really good. I wasn't able to find pretzels in the store, but I also like pretzels because they've got quite a nice salty, malty flavour, and that works very, very well for me. They can get a bit claggy in the mouth, so I do find that making sure that I have some nutrition while I'm eating those is quite helpful. At the very much the food end side of things, some kind of bready product. So I like Indian roti because I think they're quite soft and they're quite easy for me to chew with a bit of water and get down. And they're pretty much all carbohydrate, so I tend to quite like those, and I find them quite easily digestible. I will sometimes put chocolate spread on them. I've jokingly said before, I quite like chocolate spread and the taste of it in the middle of an ultra. I've jokingly said before, a jar of Nutella chocolate spread and a spoon is a perfectly viable hydration and nutrition strategy for a 100-mile race. I'm kind of kidding, but kind of not. But chocolate spread and roti work really well. The other thing is peanut butter, particularly smooth Pix peanut butter. It's got a little bit of salt in it. It's not got sugar in it. Can get a bit claggy, but just it gives a different texture and a different flavour. to avoid palate fatigue. So the bottom line is, guys and gals, you've got to get out there and you've got to try a bunch of things and find out what's going to work for you. Short runs can work. Short runs, having a gel on a sort of 15-kilometer run midweek, your midweek long run, it's probably a good idea. But really, it's in the long runs at your weekend where you want to have, like I say, I always say specificity. You want to have your pack. You want to have the amount of water you're going to be using, or nutrition in there. So if you're using Tailwind, NAC, Morton, powder, whatever you're using, have that with you. Similarly, try different nutrition, and it's on that long run where you're taking 200 to 300 calories an hour. So what's that? 50 to 90 grams of carbs. That's where you're going to learn what's going to work for you and what you can stomach over the long period of time. And like I say, the cells in your stomach and gut lining turn over quite quickly, so they will quite quickly adapt to the nutrition you're using, and you'll be able to tolerate it better and longer. So I hope that that's a little bit useful. I've kind of gone through that quite quickly, but the bottom line is, get out there, try a bunch of stuff, make sure you're eating throughout the race, drink to thirst, and have a variety of foods, preferably something salty as well, so you're getting some salt going in. With 5 weeks to go, it's all getting a little bit real. The only elite I know who's confirmed that they're attending the race is Sage Canada. Now, I think this is the 5th time he's come. I think he came in 2014, maybe again in 15. He ran here in 2020, and it's great that he's coming back for 4th time. Former champion, great runner, the kind of the OG running YouTuber. So great, it'll be great to see Sage over. My training is kind of a bit of an interesting one. Unfortunately, I think I'm not going to be running the 100-mile race. My volume just isn't there. I could probably muddle my way through it, but I don't feel like it would be a good time. You've got to respect the race. You've got to respect the distance. And I don't think I would be respecting the race or the distance if I went in with quite the volume or lack of volume that I've had over the last few weeks. But that's okay. I'm still going to be down there, going to be doing some filming, hopefully having a few conversations with people, and I'm going to be pacing one of my friends who paced me in 2019, and I'm really looking forward to help him achieve the same kind of success that I had on the trails in 2019 when I finished my first 100-mile race at Tarawera. Hope your training is going absolutely fantastic. I look forward to seeing you down there. It's really not very long now. So get outside, enjoy that hot weather, wear sunscreen, and practice your nutrition. Take care.